No, that's not so like
We actually talked about this.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Right, what we're talking about is law, the way that law is operative within technology. And in fact, so operative is law that sometimes it drives out even consideration of the artifact. There's this very interesting line from Simon, which I gave you in the readings, page 113. It says, from a technology point of view, is effectively saying, the peculiar properties of the artifact and the thin interface between natural laws within it and without it. What can we say about it? What is there to study besides the boundary sciences, those that govern the means and the task environment? In other words, the object is so determined by law, from a, if you see what I mean, scientific laws, that there is nothing to say about it as artifact. So the artifact is only seen as a sort of incidental thing. It is also seen as an idiom, scientific language, lacking true knowledge. So the artifact is kind of degraded. All that matters is the laws. Now, note also, though, that what happens here. The dissolving of the artifact as such means that technology is only interested too in the relationship between the artifact and the environment around it, which is itself reduced to the physical environment in which it's understood. Now you can see the value from technology's point of view of doing this. It simplifies radically the environment that you're dealing with. You think about something like a jet engine, it makes perfect sense. You just think about the atmosphere and you think about the particular, the qualities, how you respond to the qualities of the atmosphere in order to make an efficient jet engine. So it's precisely about this kind of reduction that technology has been able to develop. And also we can even think that historically technology arrived, this is my point with Telford here too, into nature, that high technology arrives in this almost kind of sylvan environment. But then there's a sort of irony, because Telford's Bridge, although it's like pure technology inserted into this kind of quasi-natural landscape, of course it isn't actually quite as natural as it seems. There is this beautiful echo with the landscape. And in fact, I've never actually noticed myself the rhythm of the suspension bridge against, actually these are the hills leading into Snowdonia in North Wales, and the kind of echo that Telford achieves there, probably consciously or not. I've never seen it until from this particular viewpoint. But also because we know that implicitly in Telford's Bridge, there is a whole, although it actually adheres explicitly and tacitly to a much more than physical environment. It acknowledges its culture, which in 1819 is on the cusp between romantic and classical values. So it acknowledges a sort of vision of a kind of neoclassical harmony of things in the landscape, the Poussin painting at top right, or of the romantic sensibility of wild nature, which we intervene with but believe in. This is Gainsborough landscape from earlier in the thing. And the functional elegance of late 18th century buildings. These are extraordinarily expensively built stables in a place called Seaton-Bellevue. You get the sense here that actually, consciously or no, Telford is wrapped into this culture at the same time as he's dropping technology in. In our time, we have the complete inverse of this. Technologies are launched into worlds already made. It's well like this, flat, but it's already, there's already a city there, there's already a world there. But the technology that slams into the city, in this case, eschews the norms of that made world, or the social norms. It's not interested in them, or scarce nominally. Now we accept this as normal, and read the city, we know that this gives us, in New York for example, a certain kind of challenge. Yet it's also interesting that people do tend to prefer the Empire State Building to the World Trade Center. Why? works in this great slide, which comes from a book by Lewis Mumford, where Lewis Mumford made a parallel between the scheme for the World Trade Center, which was then in progress when he wrote the book, with the John Tingley event, which was called Homage to New York. It's one of Tingley's self-destructive machines in the 1960s. Real irony in this thing, written way before, of course, the World Trade Center bombings and collapse here. But the reason for that is that technologies interposed at this scale can seem monstrous. And monstrous is the real word you need here. Monstrous means that which is without recognition of us, that which is incapable of recognizing us and our sentience, and that truly is monstrous. Something that we can access only by dissolving into it, or destroying it, or being destroyed by it. So this is. So what Bill Joy was hinting at is that technologies are potentially today becoming monstrous for us. And they're monstrous because they're incapable of recognizing and indifferent to our sentience. Now, this puts us in a kind of impasse. How do we go out of here? Well, one answer is that perhaps the only way to do it is something like I said to you. That is to say, some form of designing technology in some way or another. But the other way to think about this, which is not in conflict with it, is to try to think about actually the context of technology today, the other condition which is emerging now. Because we're in something of a paradox now. That in fact we're in an epoch where law-determined and abstracted technologies are developing stronger and stronger and stronger, and at the same time the purity of technology or technological systems is dissolved by the fact that the world today is not really just defined by the technological alone, but by the artificial. So the technological arrives in the context of the artificial. We're in here. Technologists want to abstract nature technology, but today it's that entire line. Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to convey here that we are meshed into. What do I mean by this? I'm now going to give you the entire history of the world in 3 diagrams. I should have really edited it to 1 diagram, then you would have had kind of 1,000 words in a single diagram would be anything. But here are my 3. This is that entire history of the world, so you don't need anything. This is the entire history of the world up until 1800. This is the entire history of the world for the last 2 centuries. And this is the entire history of the world for the rest of human time. We will never get beyond this. So, here we go. Okay. Let's explain. Look at this shift in the positioning of artifice and the artificial. In this little bit, it's a dot. And it's a dot because artifice is small. Artifice is crucial. Human life couldn't exist without it. But in a way, it's marginal. It is limited. Why is it limited? Because, not so much language, but certainly making, physical artifice, is limited by what you can do with a hand. 90% of the energy, at least, is in labour and making. Up till 1800 is by hand. A little bit of water power, a little bit of animal power, a little bit of wind power, but put those together, it's probably much less than 10%. So it is what you could do by human energy, and that is difficult. The forces in this world are obviously nature, like pressing upon human life. And beyond that, there has to be we wish to discover meaning in the world, so we project a realm of gods, actually, to account for the capricious forces of nature. The fact that nature seems to is simultaneously indifferent to us, sometimes hostile to us, sometimes beneficial, you could make. So we try to account for it by notions of God. But basically, human life is a kind of dialectic between acting and speaking and nature gods. Artifice scarcely comes in. The second phase of human history is the logarithmic spiral, which is, of course, the Industrial Revolution. What means the takeoff? Above all, energy. It really is steam power in the end, because steam power allows machinery, and machinery allows the division of labour at a vastly increased scale. The division of labour is not unique to industrialisation. By hand labour, the Venetians were producing ships at the rate of 1 a day in their shipyard at their height, and they were using a form of kind of assembly line production. But it's machinery that really makes it take off. The forces here are nature. You begin gradually to understand nature as a set of laws and begin to apply those. It's relatively late. A lot of technologies, even in the early Industrial Revolution, are entirely practice-based. Steam technology, there are no good theories of steam technology until well after steam technology is developed. It's in the end of the 19th century that theories of thermodynamics get going, and they get going in part from the practice, which is very interesting. Up until then, steam technology has been largely practice-driven, but what happens at the end of the 19th century is you get the beginnings of what's called the Second Industrial Revolution, based upon science and technology. So the conversion of nature into a set of laws, and as Nietzsche put it too, in this same point, he said quite graphically, the death of God, meaning that the gods are no longer seen as formative, they are there peripherally, they become religion, Nietzsche says. If it ceases to be central forces, they become merely religion, and from now on that's all we have merely religion. We fight over it, it's really political, it's not central. And of course, driving this too is capitalism. Capitalism's the reconstitution of all relations in the interest of the market. This great creative destructive force, all that is solid melts into air. That was Marx's part. It's completely right. So capitalism is the kind of a creative destructive energy, a logic of economic growth based on the free increase in productive power. And we can see this in what we might call the prime symbol of this period. Prime symbols, the great historian Oswald Spengler says, are those markers around which you could almost identify huge human cultures. I love Spengler. Spengler was this mad German historian, one of the most fun people to read if you've ever read it. He wrote this great book called The Decline of the West that came out in 1918. What Spengler says is, three civilizations were great things. Spring, autumn, spring, summer, autumn. His book was titled, came out in 1918 in Germany. Not surprisingly, Spengler was saying, we're in the winter of Faustian cultures. He called it Faustian, great Western European culture. He identified three great cultures in the West, what he called the Greek, Greece, of course, the Magian, which dealt with Rome and Islam, and then the Faustian that dealt with Europe from about 1100 onwards. Spengler said, every culture has its prime symbol, how it operates. For the Greek culture, he said it's the standing man or the column, the president. For Rome and Islam, it's the dome. One is under a beneficent god or gods, plural in the Roman case, singular in the Islamic case. For the West and the Faust, the prime symbol begins as the arch and the spire. One is aspiring towards God. And this prime symbol is as gradually shifts. The interiority. No other religion has great interiority except for European interior, because it's the interior speaking one. But it says gradually this changes. The prime symbol moves, if you like, from the vertical gradually to the horizontal. It moves into the abstract as a mediated term, calculus and so on. And then by the 19th century, it's moving horizontal. The prime symbol of industrial culture is the networks of railways, ships, cables, telecommunications, and into our epoch, fiber optics and so on. So, wonderful concept of fun. The concept of the prime symbol for Asian cultures, particularly China, Japan, was a mixture of the Garden of Paths and the 10,000 temples, Buddhism, they all pervasive. But Spengler was very much a European thinker. But fascinating chapter. If anybody wants the reference, it's just fun to read, fun to think through, not to take too seriously. So this is the epoch that we move. It begins, this horizontal schema across the world begins to make the world a singularity, global singularity, just before World War I. And then after World War I, which is a huge, but 1914-18, by the way. Not like one student once asked me, if there was a World War II, does that mean there was a World War I? Well, yes, it does. 1914-18. Which a huge increase in productive forces after which any fool can make, after which you get colossal production, Fordism. World War II is, of course, then a stimulus to that, an enormous stimulus to that. After World War II, you can produce so much that you have to begin to manage in demand. That becomes crucial, and the whole design takes off at that point. We are then set for the onset of our age. We should add, at the end of this age, we come to a level of colossal destructive capability. First World War kills 10 million people. By comparison, largest wars before that, the Napoleonic Wars, about 400,000. In the Napoleonic Wars, they were mostly soldiers, nearly not all, 89%. World War I kills about 10 million, of which 2 million are civilians. World War II kills roughly 60 million, of which approximately half are civilians. We can see a tendency, right? Right? Total war. Total. So destructive capability takes us. This is where we are. The victory of the artificial. The technologicalization of just about everything here. The expanded sphere of the artificial. The digitalization of everything. Technologically enabled global flows, trade, money, persons, media. Ubiquitous urbanization, a massive rise in population, and what we might call the mediaization of the world. All this means is where we are. The artificial has created here a global transformation. And note something else here too. If you read Simon, there's a central section in Simon. I don't have a slider, but you can now, where he talks about the artificial. It says the world we live in today is much more a man-made or artificial world than it is a natural world. Almost every element in our environment shows evidence of human artifice. The temperature in which we spend our hours, etc., etc., etc. Moreover, for most of us, the white-collared ones, the significant part of the environment consists mostly of strings of artifacts called symbols that we receive through the eyes and ears in the form of written and spoken language, and that we pour out into the environment by mouth or hand. The laws that govern these strings of symbols, the laws that govern the occasions on which we emit and receive them, the determinants of their content are all consequences of our collective artifice. And he says, final part, one may object that I exaggerate the artificiality of our world. Man must obey the law of gravity, as surely good as a stone. But then he goes on to say, we must be very careful about equating the biological with the natural. A forest may be a phenomenon of nature, a farm certainly is not. The very species upon which we depend for our food, our corn and our cattle, are artifacts of our ingenuity. A ploughed field is no more a part of nature than an asphalted street. So, artifice, not one thing. Techniques plus symbol systems plus the artificial makeover of nature. So it's a totality. What Simon doesn't quite bring out, not surprisingly, in 1968, is just how much this has now become a totality. This is our condition. Nature is no longer the ultimate horizon of experience, the artificial is. And condition. I'll actually move to this. It's the condition because it constitutes the possibilities of the world, because it constrains and enables the possible ways open to us as being human. It sets limits to and enables how we can be as humans. These two things are virtually the same. And fourthly, quite important, these limits are no longer set by human will or pure consciousness, but by the active, reflective engagement of thinking and active subjects. We could say the last great politics of will, which were unfortunate politics, was World War II. The pure projection of will. But we're no longer there. Will doesn't cut it. It's this active reflective of thinking. So this is where we are. This is the world. We're into this qualitative transformation in the conditions of global dwelling, as I said to you. And a crucial question for us starts, how do we think this? How do we think this shift in our fundamental conditions of being? I think we have to think it three ways. First of all, historically, since 19, but being careful not just to reduce it to kind of empiricism because it's deeper than that. Secondly, and more importantly, is what we'll do the rest of this lecture, which is only 2 minutes long, and next week, is to think about it structurally and systematically. But also remembering, and I want to stress this point to you, that we also need to think the artificial, that we can perhaps